Today's show is sponsored by DigitalOcean. DigitalOcean offers the simplest, most developer-friendly cloud platform. It's optimized to make managing and scaling apps easy with an intuitive API, multiple storage options, integrated firewalls and load balancers, a new managed Kubernetes service, and much more. From predictable pricing to flexible configurations to world-class customer support, you'll get access to all the infrastructure services you need to grow your business. Plus, DigitalOcean's community provides over 2,000 tutorials to help you stay up to date on the latest open source software, languages, and frameworks. So to get started on DigitalOcean for free, with a free $50 credit, go to do.co/cloudcast. That's do.co/cloudcast.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive remote studios. We're out here in San Francisco this week doing a little bit of figuring out what's going on with VMworld, a big event for the year. So out here doing some things, collecting information, seeing what's new in the VMworld space and the sort of enterprise cloud space. So with that, we're going to get to our cloud news of the week, and we'll keep it fairly VMware-centric, VMworld-centric, if you will. Lots of announcements from VMworld. VMware has become a fairly broad enterprise company. We're going to talk about that a little bit in the interview as we go forward. But a couple of announcements that may be worthwhile to those of you that follow the cloud or follow Kubernetes or some of the net new technologies. Obviously, VMware has been on a buying spree. So they did finalize the acquisition of Pivotal last week. They also closed an acquisition of a company called Carbon Black. So a couple of acquisitions in the $2 billion-ish range, depending on how the finances work out. But that was finally announced. A couple of announcements that were somewhat interesting, especially if you've been following not only cloud, but also sort of the transition from on-premises to cloud and how that impacts applications and so forth. So the first one was VMware announced something called Project Pacific. Project Pacific is essentially embedding Kubernetes into the control plane of vSphere and vCenter. So VMware has tried a number of times over the last few years to figure out a Kubernetes solution. For a while, they downplayed containers, they downplayed Kubernetes, badmouthed it themselves. Pivotal badmouthed it, but they finally bit the bullet. They had tried VMware integrated containers that didn't really fly. They tried Pivotal Kubernetes service, sort of a bolt-on that didn't really gotten a lot of traction, and now they're going to integrate fully Kubernetes into the vCenter and vSphere space. So Project Pacific has no timeline yet at this point. Typically, when VMware announces something at VMworld as a project, it typically takes about a year or so before it becomes GA or close to GA. So, we'll follow this project as it comes along, try and collect some more information. We'll put some links in the show notes to the details. The second big announcement that has more to do with kind of multi-cloud and multi-cloud management, hybrid cloud management, again, Kubernetes, is something that's called Tanzu Mission Control. So Tanzu is the new sort of umbrella name for VMware's management suite. They announced that this week. Tanzu Mission Control is in essence the Heptio HQ product. So Heptio, prior to being acquired, was talking about what they called the Heptio HQ project or product, essentially a multi-cluster, multi-cloud manager for Kubernetes clusters. This was announced today as, again, Tanzu Mission Control. Again, an early stage project somewhere in beta or something like that. Details are still fairly slim throughout the week. But basically, this is a management framework offered as a SaaS service that will manage multiple Kubernetes clusters. So whether that is on-prem clusters, clusters running in the public cloud, there is expectation that they will be able to manage the native Kubernetes services within various clouds, so GKE, AKS, EKS. So an interesting space, definitely something that a lot of companies are asking about as more and more of them adopt Kubernetes is how do we better manage them as multiple clusters, fleets of clusters, groups of clusters, policy, security, quotas, things like that. So this will be another interesting one to take a look at. Again, this was something that never made it into a product as Heptio was acquired by VMware, but is now sort of coming to fruition as something they had been working on for quite a while. So with that, I'm going to kind of wrap it up for Cloud News of the Week. We will put some links to the VMworld announcements for those of you that maybe didn't get a chance to follow it or are interested. But with that, we're going to wrap up Cloud News of the Week. We have a very interesting interview. We're doing what we call sort of our mid-year show. And we have a great guest, Brandon Wichert from the Software Defined Talk podcast is going to join us. Brandon is very, very involved in what's going on across the cloud, has been covering this space for a long time. It was a fun conversation and kind of, a different way of doing our mid-year show. Aaron and I typically do it. We wanted to break out of sort of our Cloudcast bubble a little bit. So I think you're going to enjoy that, and we look forward to talking to Brandon next. Today's sponsor is Datadog, the real-time monitoring platform that unifies metrics, logs, and distributed request traces from your containers and orchestration software. Track the health and performance of your dynamic containers, apps, and services with rich visualizations and machine learning-driven alerts. Datadog's Cluster Agent streamlines data collection from large container clusters and allows you to auto-scale Kubernetes workloads based on any metric you've already collected with Datadog. To start monitoring your Kubernetes clusters, sign up for a free trial today, and Datadog will send you a free t-shirt. Visit datadoghq.com/cloudcast to get started. And we're back. And, it is sort of later in April, but we always tend to do a show that is the mid-year show. And I think if we're really honest with ourselves and we look at the calendar, the tech calendar versus the 12-month calendar, we really are kind of at the mid-year. We've gone through beginning of the year, nothing really happens. Mid-year, we have a bunch of trade shows and some announcements gets made. And then, as you're listening to this show, basically kicks off the second half of the year. So we're going to have VMworld, and then we'll get into sort of the second round of all the cloud shows that come along and so forth, the open source show. So we thought we'd do our mid-year show. We're going to do it a little bit different this year. Sometimes we kind of, Aaron and I will get wrapped up in our own bubble and our own thoughts about stuff. And we said, maybe we should have somebody else on the show. So very excited to have Brandon Wichert, who is one of 3 co-hosts of a show that I really, really enjoy. Hopefully some of you listen to it, and if you don't, hopefully you start listening to it. But Brandon, welcome to the show. Let's tell us a little about yourself. Tell us about Software Defined Talk, and tell us about your co-host and kind of the uniqueness of the thing that you guys do over there.
All right. Well, first of all, thanks for having us on the show. And just for anyone who caught it, I think it's August. It's not April. So
did I say August? Wow.
You said April. So don't worry, guys. You're in the right place. Still the mid-year of the show.
Yeah.
But as you mentioned, yes, I am one of the co-hosts of Software Defined Talk podcast, a podcast that, totally new to you. We talk about cloud computing and a lot of nonsense. So if you don't get enough talk about cloud in this one, definitely as soon as we finish, go downline to Software Defined Talk, where 3 of us try to, usually it's more topical around the news, and then we try to work in a lot of nonsense what's happening. So it's really fun. We enjoy doing the podcast. Love for you guys to go check out the show.
Yeah, and you guys have a couple of unique things about the show. One is so it's yourself, it's Matt Ray, who is at Chef and lives down in Australia now. I guess you guys all sort of met each other in Austin, Texas, but he lives down in Australia now. And then Michael Cote, who is somewhere in Europe all the time. So you guys have now this sort of global view of things that's part of your show.
We do. Just imagine it's like 3 guys who lived in Austin, met in Austin, all work together, but now we've dispersed around the world. So it really is at times, Americans discover the rest of the world, which, probably for the rest of the world is sort of a nonsense. But Cote's in the Netherlands, and, he's always good for some random thing he learned about Europe.
Yeah. Yeah. And you got the other unique thing is, you only go by your first name. Cote only goes by his last name, and Matt Ray only goes by his full name. So it's it's a unique dynamic going on there.
That's right. I've never noticed that, but it's true. There's a lot. I think what it is. It goes back to we all work together, and there were a lot of Matts, so It always had to be a Matt Ray.
Excellent. So I think you'd mentioned we were talking before that you've listened to the show, so you kind of know the format. Well, let's just start with kind of the broadest topic we can. We're halfway through the year, whether it's April or August. What are some of the big trends that you've sort of been? You guys obviously are following this. What are some of the things that you've kind of been following? Things that have been interesting to you, kind of surprising to you, just in terms of the first half of the tech year?
Yeah, I think it's it's a good question. We can't do any type of cloud show without first talking about Kubernetes, right? It's mandated by law. So right. I think probably I think one of the biggest things is it just happened sort of recently, and I think it was sort of the last moment. Like, so Pivotal, one they announced that they're going to move to containers, right? And then they're getting acquired. And then I thought Mesosphere, changing its name, to I still don't know what, Day 2 IQ or something. And them, of course, moving to Kubernetes as well. So I think, just sort of, maybe it's been done for a while, but if you will, the container orchestration war is now like officially over. I guess it's been won. It's all going to be Kubernetes. And, I think those are the last 2 major, holdouts. So it's maybe not a surprise, but I still think it's a big development. It's like now everyone is settled in on Kubernetes, and as we go forward, it sort of resets the stack a little bit, and the competition will be, I see going forward, just like who makes deploying on top of Kubernetes the simplest, right? That's like the new competition layer, and I think it is interesting because there's so many different approaches just a few years ago, and now everyone's essentially agreed to that one platform. And I think the pivotal thing, is even more fascinating. The fact that, I was looking it up the other day. I think they were public for like a year and a half, right? So it was like an incredible, kind of like whirlwind of like they go public, the stock runs up, they have this whole, this approach the public market is understanding, and then they announce they missed earnings, they're moving to containers, which it's not like cause and effect, but I think they were already doing that, and then now they're going to be acquired by VMware. So it sort of just shows you, I guess, how quickly things in this industry change.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I think the other layer. And you guys have talked about this probably even more than I have on the PodCTL podcast. Is like, is there actually, going forward, is there actually any money in Kubernetes, right? So it's sort of become this de facto standard, but you start looking at, and it's sort of interesting. There seems to be money in Kubernetes if you're buying it on premises or you're selling it on premises, but in the public cloud, essentially the cloud providers have all said, we're going to basically give it away for free because we make all our money in compute and storage and networking. And it'll be interesting to see if essentially that sort of freeness in the public cloud from a price perspective kind of whittles its way back towards the things that still live on premises and so forth. It's like big thing, lots of hype, lots of people go to the show. Is there actually any money in it?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And I think, like the history, I think in some way a guide here, I think VMware was so successful as essentially establishing a platform, if you will, a layer on top of all the operating systems, and went on to be, and still is, right, just an incredibly valuable company. And I think when Kubernetes came out, or just this idea that orchestration of containers was going to be big, right? Remember Docker and Docker Swarm and Mesosphere, all these guys, right? And a lot of that VC money flowed into it. And I think collectively, and you always wonder how much of it's planned versus how much of it just emerges. But clearly when Google launches Kubernetes, and then AWS a little bit slow on the take-up, but they get there quick. Microsoft gets there quick. All the other cloud guys get there. And I think it's just, they know that we can't allow any one platform to become dominant. We can't allow anyone to get a specific advantage that we want to be competing with for years to come. So I think that's what went on there, right? So that, from the public cloud standpoint, I think it's just table stakes, and going forward, they all want to sell services on top of Kubernetes. And ultimately, I think the competition, as I was saying before, it just becomes, because all the startups and all the companies I talk to, and just like people that are in this, are always talking about making it simpler. So I think that going forward is like, who makes it the simplest to get this application going. And of course, that's sort of I know your day job, right? You've got a big opinion on how to make that simple with OpenShift and other things like that. So I think in the end, it's a good outcome, but it will definitely be a couple years of confusion about, well, exactly how does this simpler? And I, everybody, I always kind of joke. It's like, everyone is showing me like a tool that prevents me, that shows that it's the value proposition is like, you don't have to edit the YAML. And it's like, okay, that's good. But then sometimes you're like, but you're kind of locking me in, right? So there's like every tool sort of comes with this, like, maybe I should edit the YAML. Oh, this is a pain. Oh, I don't like what you're not letting me do, right? So that's going to be the thing that people have to figure out going forward.
Right. Well, and basically we've come full circle. We went from we want to make the stuff on top of the platform really valuable. We want to make the platform essentially commoditized. We went through the Pivotal days. Pivotal had its run. Cloud Foundry had its run. It kind of lost. Kubernetes wins, and now we're talking about, okay, Kubernetes is a commodity, and now we're going to go back through the sort of, but don't call it PaaS days, but the building on top of Kubernetes, which is essentially to make things, good for developers, and call that a whatever, right? So there's a new opportunity to name something that essentially, the artist formerly known as PaaS.
Absolutely. I could not agree more. And I think, this is when you talk to the Pivotal guys that are just like, I don't know, a little bit bitter. It's like, we already did this, and like we did this. We already had this solved. And I try to explain to them, it's like music. It's like, any type of like popular culture. Like, I don't know. It's not always clear why things get adopted, and not necessarily, what's the best. It just happens. And it's like, well, it's happened for Kubernetes, and we're all going to have to get used to it going forward.
Right. The flip side of that, and I know you guys dig into this a little bit. We dig into it some because we'll get a few of the VCs come on. We've seen this kind of response to Amazon in particular, starting to go, hey, we're taking a popular open source project, we're turning it into a service, and that's gone on for a little while with Amazon. That's not totally new, but now they're starting to do some stuff where they're creating their own distributions of certain projects, and it's forcing a bunch of companies to create these sort of essentially pseudo-proprietary open core types of things. What's your take on this? I mean, do you think we'll see VCs continue to fund these sort of starting companies for projects when they're not sure how they're going to compete against Amazon?
Well, I mean, there's so much venture capital right now. I think we can be assured a lot of these startups, kind of some of them I was joking about, some of the people making YAML easier, they've definitely won some VC. No, now whether they be successful going forward, I think I think to me, it's pretty well understood at this point that like just using the success of an open source project as the rationale to then invest in it and build kind of the open core concept, right? That will sell services and support and maybe some other functionality around an open source project in a proprietary way. Like I think that day is, I mean, honestly, I think it's been gone for a long time, right? Yeah. But people are just now catching up to it. So I think going forward, I like to say this all the time. In open source, right? It's not a business strategy. It can help you increase your adoption. It can also help you get some community support. But ultimately, you still have to fundamentally answer the question: why will someone pay me? What is the specific reason they're going to pay me? And to licensing models, I think it was real interesting this week. We saw two things that I think sort of just define like how confused everybody is. It's on one hand, Microsoft kind of announced a whole new pricing or licensing scheme for Windows Server going forward. Essentially, they don't want you to take your licenses you own and put them in the cloud, right? That's kind of the short version of it. And they want you to pay again. And it's like, and everyone's really, really mad about that. And it's like, this is what I always say. It's like, never take stuff away. They're making a big change. But then in the same week, Microsoft has acquired, right, the JDK company, the company that was essentially supporting. Yeah, there you go. So what is that? JClarity is really, in the whole open JDK moment, is really a response to Oracle, of course, imposing a license of the JDK on customers going forward. So it just kind of shows like everybody is, I think, just trying to figure this out. Like everyone needs to find a business model that makes money for them. And I think everyone is sort of trying to attack everyone else and at the same time, defend their own area. So it's like, if you think about it, Oracle and Microsoft doing the same thing, right? They're basically putting licenses on very popular products in hopes that people will just, if you will, pay the tax. And then you have Amazon out there who's just the 900-pound gorilla. Just, we're going to make everything free. We're going to just put it on here. We're going to make it simple. And they just want to capture as much, I think, market share as possible in the infrastructure as a service market. So, but I think a lot's to come, right? So I think at the end of the day, if you're starting a new company today, and you're going to do any type of infrastructure kind of service offering, you better have a great answer to why someone's going to come to you, and you're not going to just be commoditized to the cloud. Or as I like to say, just don't take $100 million in venture capital, maybe take $2 or $3 million in venture capital, and you can still sell that company to Amazon, Google, Microsoft, or many of the other cloud vendors out there.
That's right. Yeah, you never want too much. So you guys have a concept in your show you've been kicking around because you want to get in the faux conference business. I think you guys are calling it Legacy Con. Is that right?
Yeah, Legacy Con.
So if you're into virtualization, you're into old Java, maybe like Windows 95 support and so forth. I'm worried a little bit about your conference because VMware would have been probably one of the platinum sponsors for this. If you'd have gone back a year, VMware has acquired like 7, 8, 9 companies in the last year. They're trying to lose their sponsorship for this. Are they trying to become like the Amazon of on-prem enterprise? Is that their model?
Well, I spent for good or for bad, I spent some time at Sun Microsystems a long time ago now, and when your core moneymaker is under attack, right? You have to do something, right? So if you remember, Sun bought MySQL at the time. It was like unthinkable. It's like for $1 billion, right? And I think, and it was like, hey, we're going to end Sun. If I don't know, for those of you old enough to remember, like Jonathan Schwartz was CEO. He was like, everything's going open source. Like I was there, and I was on like just a traditional product, and everyone was like, what? Like, I mean, it was just sort of like, wait a minute, this is crazy. And I think what you're seeing at VMware is they have this incredible cash cow with all the traditional VMware products, but they clearly, and then of course they've done deals now, it's sort of like these, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? But they've done deals with AWS, Microsoft, and I guess that Google was the last one that finally got announced. So they all know, all the cloud vendors know, all the workloads or a lot of the workloads are in VMware. So they all want those workloads to move to the cloud. So VMware knows that their customers also want to move that there. So in the short term, it makes sense for them all to do deals, and they can all make money in the near term. But going forward, you got to think at VMware, at the strategy group, there must be like a million different PowerPoint decks going, right? Where they've got Heptio, Pivotal, they've got Bitnami in there as well. Or I guess the Pivotal acquisition is still a rumor, but it seems like since they all own each other, right, that will essentially get bought up. And so I guess, to me, like something, I assume they're going to like, I don't know if it's like an OpenStack competitor, or sorry, not OpenStack. I don't know. I don't even know what it is. Something is going to come out of it as a new competitor, like a new platform as a service kind of offering. That's what I see. And that will be their attempt to, if you will, make all Kubernetes all simple, and for them to maybe make a real run at, I would assume, hybrid cloud. Now, I don't know. It feels like they've done this already, right? I think everyone will be like, wait a minute, did this already happen? But I don't know what else. I think if you're running VMware, like what else can you do? You either do that, or you run the company. If you're Dell EMC, you just run the company and take as much cash out of it, and start reinvesting in other areas.
Yeah, I think they've got two things going on, and it's funny because like the last time they went on this big buying spree was right towards the end of Paul Maritz's tenure. Like he basically was trying to rebuild Microsoft. He bought like a Word application and he bought like an email company and a bunch of stuff.
I remember that.
These seem a little less crazy than that, but. Like you got to figure they have sort of two strategies, right? So, well, maybe three. Like, so one is they have their huge cash cow on-prem. They don't want that to go away. Then they've got customers who are like, hey, we don't want to be in the data center business anymore. We might go to the cloud. They're like, hey, no problem. Just, move your island into this other island that's on Amazon. That's going to check that box, or it's on Azure. And so they're like, all right, I get to keep that cash cow. And now they're just trying to find like things they can put into that ELA. So they're like, you almost wonder if they're kind of jealous of the Microsoft people that are trying to move license things around. They're like, I don't get to impose things on customers enough about where they can run their. I want to be able to do that. Like there's going to be entire podcasts about where you can run your VMware licenses and where you can't, and consultants that look at that stuff. Jeez. Yeah, they're gonna have a big portfolio of stuff. I don't even know what they are anymore. They're just a big enterprise software company, I guess.
Well, at some point it does, right? At some point a company gets so big that it's really the sales channel is what's valuable, right?
Yeah.
So you just have relationships with everybody, like VMware, I'm sure does, and so you can call on everyone. And I don't know, sometimes it works if you get the right acquisition that people want. You can plug it in and like flush it through the channel and make a ton of money. But sometimes it's very easy to buy a bunch of stuff and just confuse everyone and then make less money. And then you're at the QBRs and people are just like, everyone is mad. Like everyone is upset and mad. So I think though VMware, it does, I guess, two things that strike me about it is one, it will probably be around like all these platforms much longer than we think. Like to some degree, everyone, probably listening to this podcast is like, oh, everything's going to be in a container and we've all moved on and it's all over, but in kind of my day job, I spend a lot of time talking to like very large traditional enterprises and like the number of VMs they have. I mean, thousands, right? And they will say like, I want to move, 3,000 or 4,000 VMs and has like X number of applications to the cloud. And so VMware's, it's not going anywhere. I mean, It's going to be around and pay off at like some annuity for a long time, and sometimes like I think of it's like bullets in a gun, just like if you have a lot of revenue and you can stick it out, things can eventually turn back your way. But I do worry about, and just VMware's naming in general. I worry about the VMware Heptio Pivotal thing that is created and what it's called and like how confusing it is. Like I'm always like GSX, ESX. Like I don't know. It's like I just hope they make it real simple. Whatever they build, keep the name very simple. That's my advice.
So what you're saying is somewhere there's a PowerPoint slide or a whiteboard that has like D2IQ somewhere on a thing going, all right, we're not going to rename ourselves that, but we need something other than VMware because we're not that anymore.
Yeah, that's probably coming. That is probably true. But yeah, don't use the D2IQ. But I used to say, I've said many times, like I love the it's the data center was it DCOS, data center operating systems. This is the old Mesosphere marketing. I think when that came out, I was like, I love this. This is what we're all trying to get to. I love this vision. I don't know if that is all completely retired with Mesosphere branding, but I always, although maybe it never got there,
maybe VMware can buy it. Maybe VMware can buy the trademark. It would kind of be a perfect fit for them.
Somebody is. I just think I feel so bad. Like if you were the company, you were like the IT director, the CIO, and you're like, I'm all in on Mesosphere. Like a couple of years ago, you're like, I am all in. And then and they come out. I know they're going to still support it, but that's got to be a bad feeling. I mean, it's only been 2 years, and now you got to already move away from it. That's a tough decision for someone.
So let's talk about the other side of the spectrum. We talked about VMware. AWS. Year after year, they win the Gartner Magic Quadrant for for sort of largest cloud and so forth. They're the 800-pound gorilla. Do you see any cracks in their armor? Do you see? I mean, their revenue numbers continue to grow, but they sort of growth-wise they've sort of slowed down a little bit. Law of big numbers. Do you see any cracks in their armor? Are they doing anything? I mean, at some point, like every tech company stops being like the geniuses of new technology, and they have to start doing some things that we've all seen before, like they change their pricing, they start to hide some stuff. I mean, are you seeing anything from AWS that makes you think that their reign is slowing down at all?
Honestly, at this point, I don't think so. I mean, I think they continue to dominate. They continue to release lots of new functionality. Typically what happens though is eventually the platform becomes so big and maintaining it is so expensive that this is where a company starts to open up, some different fronts, if you will, to compete against it. And but right now, I just think the growth of AWS and the amount of people that they hire. I was just at lunch the other day with one of the AWS reps, and he brought like a new person. He's like, yeah, this guy just started today, and we were talking about stuff. I just amazed. Like every day, I just see more and more people joining. So I think they're still on that like massive growth curve, massive investment curve. So and the platform is still, if you will, new, but it's obviously been around for a while. But they've really done a good job maintaining it. I think, what will make AWS vulnerable, right? Like we always talk about in product strategy is like, the strength has to become the weakness. It's sort of like, what's the technology that we're going to look at that sort of makes us look at like, man, all these AWS data centers, that's really a hindrance, right? What is going to happen where people are like, that big investment they made, well, we have a way that we don't really need to use that, right? Or we have some other strategy. And then of course, we've talked a little bit about Kubernetes, but this kind of, whatever we call it, serverless or functions as a service, or, kind of this next wave, does somebody come at, a new approach that really catches probably everybody off guard, right? Because that would be the other thing. But even in that position, right, you think AWS would be the fast follower. And, probably the business that's the strongest, I know, because I think Gartner stopped doing it, right? But, the infrastructure as a service, like I was saying before, like, it's pretty boring, but like there's just still so many people just like putting their virtual machines in AWS. It's like that sort of does look like a coin operated slot machine at this point. So I think they're, in a strong position. Yeah. I think it is very hard to compete with them. But something always happens. And if I knew what it was, I would go do it.
Right. Right. Well, there's two things. There's two interesting things about it. One is, like you said, I mean, they still make the bulk of their money from compute and storage and networking and probably IAM, and I think that's the world's greatest lock-in. And if you think about that, you're like, those things, number one, they're not going away. They have a massive footprint of that, so you can relatively keep costs down. And if they really want to, they can keep releasing these sort of minimum viable versions of some application that's out there, whether it's a Kubernetes or it's a, machine learning or something. And if they really want to, they can just go, well, it's free and all you do is pay for the compute. And so for competitors to come along in like the application side or things up in the stack, it does become very hard to, because people are like, well, maybe I'll run it in AWS. Do I use the native service? That's a huge competitive advantage for them, right? They're sort of dictating prices of what things look like. The other thing I think that's hard, and this is like you're thinking about, well, what'll take it over? In the past, the companies that have struggled, something like their technology became somewhat kind of irrelevant, right? So like Microsoft was the desktop operating system, and then mobile became a big deal. So Apple became a big deal, or like Oracle was the relational database, and then like non-relational databases became a thing. I mean, like Amazon has every technology. It's not like they're missing something, today. So I think that's the other hard part about competing against or Amazon or anybody is you can't sort of flank them because they have all the flanks at least moderately covered or minimally covered.
Yeah, no, I agree. I do think, you see a little bit, I'm sure you run into it a lot. Like a lot of times people say the developer experience, right? I hear Google a lot, right? That really, because if you think about that as for a moment, because we talked about what makes things successful, like popular music fads in general, but there is this movement, right? And as I was watching Google, closely, like all of us, it's like, if you make the developer experience and the tools so significantly better, right, that that becomes a true differentiator, and it isn't something that to your point about minimal viable product, right? It's like where AWS sort of kind of goes this path of like we'll eventually get there, but it sort of frustrates developers along the way versus like having this out of the box experience that just works great. I think that's a place where maybe there's a little bit of weakness, right? So it'll be interesting because I know again they continue to invest in every single one of those areas, but it is. I mean, it's hard to like sit here today and say, next year, next couple years, right? It really feels like AWS, kind of has a significant lead that's going to be tough to overtake.
Yeah. They definitely do not have a whole lot of headwinds at this point, and it'll be interesting. So, lots of articles written. Especially earlier this year, I think it was just because there was a bunch of IPOs, Lyft and Uber and some of the gig economy companies that were, hey, they are contracted to spend 30 million, 40 million, 300 million, with AWS or with Google or with somebody. And now we're starting to see those companies struggle a little bit, in the real financial markets. We're going to see WeWork go out there and they've got all sorts of bad numbers. And do you think, because for a while people get influenced by those companies, spending in the public cloud. Do you think as those folks, if they struggle to make those payments, you think that will have any impact on how fast people are using the public cloud, or they'll just be like, that's not like our business. We're a bank. We're an insurance company. Those idiots in the valley, if they screw up, that doesn't impact me at all.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of have two parts to this. I think the specific kind of unicorns going public and whether or not they make their payments, I don't necessarily think that's going to have a huge impact on any of the cloud providers or the adoption of cloud in general. What I do think is happening, and I see more evidence of, is people. I was on the phone with a customer today. They had moved everything to a cloud provider, and then they got the bill, and they were just freaking out, right? Like they just had no idea, not good discipline and understanding what they were going to pay for. So they're actually talking about moving some stuff back, right? It got so expensive.
You didn't tell them to just call Corey Quinn and he would fix it?
I probably, that's not a bad idea. I probably should have suggested that because we did collectively talk about like, well, we could talk to the provider and let's see if we can right size your stuff. But I do, sometimes we joke, cloud sticker shock, right? Especially when people are, maybe larger traditional companies, they've sort of just gotten bought off on the hype, but they have not really, worked out the spreadsheet. Yeah. Is that like you can have this sticker shock and this idea that like everything's going to be cheaper and we're going to pay on demand. It's like it can quickly cascade out of control. So I think that's probably, if there is like the trough of disillusionment, like if we, everyone wants to move to the cloud, now we're all there and we think we're paying too much. So I think there is going to be this moment of, right. And this is kind of back to like, hybrid cloud. We talk a lot about that. Does it really exist? And, everyone has a different opinion about it, but clearly, people are going to work out exactly what they're willing to pay for. And in some cases, right, I think maintaining, especially if you just, I always tell customers this, like if you just want to, if the only reason you're going to the cloud is to save money, it probably will disappoint you, right? Like you need to be bought off on the being more agile, being able to do things faster, being more innovative. So that's probably, as we think about, forget about these IPOs. Maybe as we look ahead, not an economist by any means, but people are talking recession, right? I think maybe that's what we see things slow down. That, hey, if there's a recession, budgets are under pressure, there isn't as much money to do digital transformation projects. And it's like, hey, let's call up our traditional vendors and let's just negotiate a better deal for our on-premise hardware and software for a little bit and see if we can contain cost. I do think that'll happen in the next year or so.
Yeah, I think that's possible. Or you're going to see a whole rash of new startups that do nothing but look and see if your Amazon VMs are still running at 12 o'clock at night and they turn them off for you or something like that.
I have to say, it is the funniest thing when you're at these conferences or you're like listening to all this stuff. They're always talking about AI, right? Like how much machine learning stuff can we talk about? I mean, it's like an endless amount of stuff. It's like, well, how about just figuring this out on the pricing, right? You know, I mean, why don't you look at all this data and just optimize it for me and charge me the absolute minimum amount, right? But it's always like, no, look at the pictures, or we have this race car. You know what I mean? It's like, why not just fix the pricing? You have all the data, you know. So, or I guess call Corey. You can also just call Corey.
That's right.
He'll figure it all out for you too.
All right, so I'm gonna wrap it up with one last question. I think we've hit on every buzzword. We've talked about VCs. We've talked about gig economy. We've talked about Amazon. I want to talk real quick about digital transformation. And it's interesting. You made a comment. We had some show notes, and you were like, the only people who actually say digital transformation are the vendors, because companies are just doing this stuff. Like they're smart enough to realize their business has to change. Have you seen any good examples where you're just like, yeah, that's like the one thing that jumps out to me is I feel like we're seeing more partnerships where there is sort of like a technology aspect and like the company, whereas before the partnerships were always just like, we're doing a financial deal, we're merging because we have two good sales forces. And more of these announcements we see are like, company out of Pittsburgh you've never heard of that does autonomous driving with UPS, and also, a drone company. And you're like, okay, that's somebody thinking outside the box. Are you seeing that as well? And like, is digital transformation just a tech vendor buzzword? Like the companies don't care?
Well, I think it is, but I also think, no normal people like walk around like, how's your digital transformation going? And like we as like consumers or like everyday users of things, like I've never called you up like, hey, you're not going to believe this digital transformation thing I just happened. You got to check it out. So what I say is, like here in Austin, and maybe some of this will be regional, but just like fast food. My son's like 8, and so sometimes we go to these fast food places. But I just noticed like Sonic is like kind of this drive-in restaurant here in the U.S., right? And you can just pull up, and it's kind of like the old school, drive-in where you can like basically park your car and order. But now they have this app, right? You can order ahead. They even give you a discount on it. Chick-fil-A, love the chicken sandwiches, right? They have a great app. You go in, get all these points. Even when you're getting your hair cut, right? I was like, it's now Supercuts or Birds here in Austin. Like they have an app where you just basically get in, check in ahead. You can see exactly what the wait time is. Yeah. Almost, I'd say half the restaurants I go to, Chewy's here in Austin, like Mexican
they don't have
food
a menu anymore.
Yeah, it's like maybe that, or when you get in, they just say like, hey, what you like? They're just like, hey, what's your? They don't ask necessarily your name. They're like, what's your phone number? And if you want to get on the wait list. And then sure enough, the phone number has a link usually to an app, tells you exactly where you are. And if your son's asking you, just show him, right? And it's like, and then even the government, here in Austin, right? They they have Austin Energy. Not only will tell you how your energy usage is going, but you can actually, register if you have a Nest. For it'll give you $85 for the permission, if you will, to just like crank up your air conditioning or crank it down during, peak period. So I just kind of say, it's like sometimes we get caught up in all these like what's happening and Kubernetes and all that stuff. And it's like, when you look around every day, if you start to take note, like you'll see how many of these things are they can be small, but it's just sometimes like, I think like waiting in line for anything, if I can check in ahead of time and, be there just before my haircut or get my food just a little bit faster. I mean, all these things really add up. So I think a lot of stuff, unfortunately, we just call it digital transformation, but I usually just call it like, hey, I had this great user experience, and it usually results in like, it really saved me a bunch of time and energy. Right. And that's really what's happening. And so I think sometimes we get caught up with like, is it really happening? Yeah, it's definitely happening. It's happening all the time. You're using it. It's just no one calls it digital transformation. And unfortunately, we in the tech world, I guess we're not creative enough to come up with something more interesting to call it. So I just call it fun apps, right? Yeah. That's really what's happening.
Yeah, good stuff. Brandon, I'm going to wrap it up with that. Real quick plug for where folks can find software-defined talk or software-defined interviews, or all the places that you and Cote and Matt Ray are sharing the good news.
Yeah, we'll make it easy. Just go to softwaredefinedtalk.com. We've got it all. Go there. You can subscribe to the podcast. We've got all the intranets. There's some Twitter. There's some Facebook. There's some LinkedIn, and you can find all of our Twitter handles there as well. So check it out. Go download it. If you're listening to this one, there's a good chance you'll like Software Defined Talk.
Yep, one of my favorites. I've been listening for a long time. Highly recommend it. I would give you 5 stars if we could. I will. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up. Great to finally have you on the show, folks. As always, thanks for listening. Thanks for telling a friend. Thanks for rating the show. And with that, we will talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.